The story of Le Magnifique follows Alex Johnson's journey from success to realization. A man driven by pride, Alex once built an exclusive restaurant for the elite, but hidden biases and arrogance led him to lose it all. Samuel and Lisa, a couple he once overlooked, became the new owners, transforming the space into an inclusive haven where everyone felt welcome. Their journey turns Le Magnifique into a beacon of warmth and acceptance, showing that true success lies not in exclusivity, but in community. This story offers a powerful lesson in humility and the true value of success. If you enjoyed this story, press 1. If you found it deeply moving, press 2, and share your own stories with us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any inspiring stories coming up. Share your thoughts on Alex's decision in the comments below. Bookmark. Alex Johnson stood proudly at the entrance of his upscale restaurant, Le Magnifique, a testament to the years of perseverance and sacrifices he had made to achieve his dream. He remembered the countless sleepless nights spent scrubbing dishes in cramped kitchens, and the weekends he gave up to attend culinary workshops, all while saving every penny to one day open his own place. From long nights working in small kitchens to building connections in the culinary world, every step led to this moment, and his dedication was evident in every detail. The restaurant is located in a prestigious neighborhood known for its tree-lined streets and historic mansions. It exuded luxury and exclusivity, reflecting Alex's meticulous standards. The soft glow from crystal chandeliers bathed the restaurant in a warm golden light, illuminating tables adorned with crisp white linens and polished silverware. Patrons, elegantly dressed, sipped wine and dined with grace, embodying the sophisticated atmosphere that Alex had worked tirelessly to create. Alex himself embodied refined success, having earned accolades from top culinary magazines and recognition as a leading restaurateur in the city. His tailored suit fit impeccably, and his keen eyes scanned the room, ensuring every detail was perfect. From the freshly arranged flowers to the gentle conversations of the guests, Alex's focus was unwavering. He believed in creating not just a dining experience, but an exclusive escape for those who could afford it. His pride in Le Magnifique was evident in the way he carried himself, confident, composed, and always in control. As he stood by the door, greeting guests with a courteous smile, Alex took a moment to appreciate what he had built. Le Magnifique was not just a restaurant. It was a symbol of refinement, a sanctuary for the city's elite, celebrities, business moguls, and high-profile socialites. The ambiance offered understated luxury, making everyone feel they were part of something special. And to Alex, that was everything. Alex always regarded Le Magnifique as a space reserved for the elite class of society. Although he never outwardly expressed it, Alex had unspoken rules in his mind about who was fit to step into this establishment. He discreetly selected guests based on his own perceptions of value and class. Those who did not match the luxurious image he had crafted found it challenging to gain entry to Le Magnifique. Alex's smile remained courteous as he greeted guests, but his eyes sometimes revealed an underlying judgment, assessing whether each guest truly belonged in the refined world of Le Magnifique. He would note small details, an ill-fitted suit, a lack of confidence, or an overly casual demeanor, all of which, in his mind, marked someone as unworthy of the exclusivity he had worked so hard to create. The glimmering light from the crystal chandeliers, paired with the intricately arranged flowers, highlighted the opulence of the restaurant. And within that same light, Alex's gaze reflected the boundaries he had set for this exclusive space. That evening, as Alex stood near the entrance, his attention was caught by the arrival of a couple who immediately stood out. Samuel and Lisa Brown, a black couple, walked confidently into Le Magnifique, dressed impeccably. They were celebrating their anniversary, a special occasion that called for the best, and they had heard about Le Magnifique's excellent reputation. Both were successful in their respective fields, Samuel as an attorney and Lisa as an interior designer. They were accustomed to the finer things in life and had chosen Le Magnifique as the perfect setting for their special night. Samuel wore a perfectly tailored black suit, and Lisa donned a stunning red gown that flowed elegantly as she moved. They exuded sophistication and class, their demeanor poised and assured, fitting seamlessly with the luxurious surroundings. Yet despite their polished appearance, Alex felt an uneasy stir within him. Bookmark. While Alex's smile remained polite, there was an undercurrent of disapproval in his eyes as he watched Samuel and Lisa. He found himself questioning why they had chosen his restaurant, feeling an irrational discomfort that stemmed from deeply ingrained biases. In his mind, Le Magnifique was meant for a certain kind of clientele, and Samuel and Lisa, despite their elegant appearance, did not align with that preconceived image. He found himself judging them not by their attire or demeanor, but by their race, an unspoken prejudice that clashed with the exclusivity he believed Le Magnifique represented. To Alex, the arrival of Samuel and Lisa challenged the quiet assumptions he had made about what his clientele should look like. It wasn't their elegance that unsettled him. It was the way they did not fit the mold of the typical patrons he envisioned for his establishment. As Samuel and Lisa made their way through the restaurant, heads turned, not because they were out of place, but because they commanded attention. Some guests exchanged impressed glances, while others whispered quietly, admiring Lisa's striking gown and Samuel's confident stride. Their confidence and grace were undeniable, drawing admiration from other guests. But for Alex, their presence was a disruption, an uncomfortable reminder that his unspoken rules about exclusivity, prestige, and who truly belonged in such a luxurious setting were being challenged. He watched as they were seated at a table, his courteous demeanor masking the internal conflict brewing within him. The chandeliers above cast a soft glow over the couple, illuminating Lisa's radiant smile and Samuel's composed expression. They seemed at ease, unbothered by any tension, as they took in the ambiance of Le Magnifique. Meanwhile, Alex stood near the entrance, his gaze lingering on them, the smile on his face now feeling forced. Despite their flawless presentation, he couldn't shake the sense that they didn't belong, not because of anything they had done, but because of the irrational and unfounded prejudice rooted deep within him. It was a conflict Alex wasn't yet ready to face, and the presence of Samuel and Lisa only made it more apparent. Alex decided to lead Samuel and Lisa to a table near the kitchen, a spot far from the center of the restaurant, where the atmosphere was lively, filled with the gentle clinking of glasses and soft laughter under the warm glow of chandeliers. This was no random decision. By placing them there, Alex subtly sent a message. They were not truly welcome in this space. To Alex, their presence disrupted the carefully curated atmosphere of exclusivity, and he feared that allowing them to sit in a prime location would somehow diminish the image he had worked tirelessly to maintain. The table near the kitchen had dimmer lighting, lacking the elegant decor and vibrant ambiance of the central area, far from the ideal place to experience the luxury of Le Magnifique. This was an act of quiet discrimination, intended to preserve the image Alex believed his restaurant should uphold, an image of sophistication and exclusivity, one that he felt Samuel and Lisa did not fit. Alex escorted the couple to the table with a polite smile, but his eyes betrayed a sense of disapproval. Samuel and Lisa remained composed, refusing to let the arrangement affect their mood. Samuel glanced at Lisa, his eyes briefly reflecting a mix of amusement and resilience, as if silently acknowledging the situation but choosing not to let it spoil their evening. They took their seats gracefully, exchanging affectionate glances, while Alex turned away, a fleeting sense of power and control returning to him. Deep down, however, Alex knew this was more than just a seating decision. It reflected the irrational prejudice and insecurity that he had never truly confronted. He remembered an instance from his early days managing the restaurant when he had overheard a guest's comment about maintaining the exclusivity of the clientele. That moment had stuck with him, shaping his fears of losing the image he worked so hard to cultivate. Alex approached Samuel and Lisa's table with a courteous smile, but his eyes reflected an underlying disdain. He couldn't shake the feeling that their presence challenged the exclusivity of the restaurant, a space he had worked hard to cultivate for what he considered to be a refined clientele. He leaned in slightly and asked, "Is everything to your satisfaction so far?" with exaggerated politeness, emphasizing each word deliberately. Samuel and Lisa recognized the insincerity in Alex's overly deliberate tone and the forced smile that didn't reach his eyes yet remained composed. They responded with confidence, their smiles calm and their gaze unwavering, showing that they were not easily affected by Alex's attitude. "Thank you, Alex," Samuel said evenly. "We're enjoying ourselves so far." As the evening progressed, Alex found himself increasingly uneasy, feeling that his carefully curated atmosphere was being challenged in a way he couldn't control. He watched from a distance, his eyes fixed on Samuel and Lisa's table. Despite his best efforts, an uncomfortable feeling gnawed at him. Despite his efforts to make them feel out of place, such as assigning them a less desirable table and subtly delaying their service, Samuel and Lisa remained calm, their composure unwavering. Their confidence seemed almost defiant, and it was starting to affect Alex more than he wanted to admit. He felt a knot forming in his stomach as he observed Samuel lean over to say something to Lisa, his expression gentle and affectionate. Lisa smiled in response, and Samuel reached out to hold her hand across the table. The simple act of love and intimacy between them only heightened Alex's sense of unease. He had intended for them to feel uncomfortable, for them to sense that they did not belong, yet they were completely unperturbed. It was as though his attempts to undermine them were invisible to them, or worse, irrelevant. For Alex, this was not just about maintaining the exclusivity of his restaurant, it was about control. Control was crucial to him, because it represented the power he had worked tirelessly to achieve, a sense of order that kept his insecurities at bay. Every detail of Le Magnifique was a reflection of his vision, and anything that threatened this vision threatened his sense of self-worth. Le Magnifique was his domain, a space where he dictated the rules and set the tone. He had spent years building a reputation, creating an atmosphere that only the right kind of people would appreciate. And now here were Samuel and Lisa, not fitting into the mold he envisioned, yet behaving as if they belonged without question. It made him question his own authority. How could they be so unaffected by the subtle slights he directed at them? Book Mo back. The more Alex watched Samuel's gentle smiles and Lisa's carefree laughter, the more frustrated he became, feeling the couple's unaffected demeanor mock his attempts at control. His fingers tapped restlessly against the polished surface of the bar, his eyes never leaving the couple. He felt his sense of power slipping, and with it, the confidence he had in his carefully curated environment. The image of Samuel gently holding Lisa's hand lingered in his mind, a reminder that perhaps in this moment it was he who was out of place in his own restaurant. Determined to make Samuel and Lisa feel unwelcome, Alex devised a subtle plan. He approached the head waiter and quietly instructed him to delay the service at their table. The orders for Samuel and Lisa were intentionally placed at the bottom of the list, ensuring they would have to wait significantly longer for their meals. Alex hoped that the couple would grow frustrated, maybe even complain, and thus justify his prejudice against them, stemming from his own insecurity and fear of losing control over his establishment. He wanted to make them uncomfortable, to have them question if they truly belonged at Le Magnifique. As the minutes turned into nearly an hour, Samuel and Lisa showed no signs of irritation. While the surrounding tables received their appetizers and drinks promptly, Samuel and Lisa were left waiting, their glasses of water the only items on their table. But the couple remained unfazed. They sat close together, engaged in relaxed conversation, laughing softly at shared jokes. Samuel reached for Lisa's hand, and they exchanged affectionate glances that conveyed their deep bond. They seemed to be genuinely enjoying each other's company, as if the delay was of no consequence at all. From his vantage point, Alex observed them, his growing annoyance evident in his clenched jaw, his fingers drumming impatiently against the bar counter, and a tightness forming around his eyes as he struggled to maintain his composure. He couldn't understand why they weren't reacting as he had anticipated. Every subtle tactic he had used to undermine them was failing. Instead of complaining or demanding attention, Samuel and Lisa were displaying the kind of grace that began to make Alex question his assumptions. They were patient, unbothered by the inconvenience, and in no rush, qualities that defied the stereotype Alex had unconsciously projected onto them. The other patrons, many of whom were regulars at La Magnifique, noticed the couple's delay as well. Curious glances were occasionally thrown towards Samuel and Lisa's table. Some murmured among themselves, perhaps wondering why the couple's food was taking so long. These subtle reactions from the other patrons only added to Alex's unease, as he realized that his strategy might be drawing more attention than he intended. Yet Samuel and Lisa remained a portrait of poise, unfazed by the service they were receiving, entirely absorbed in their conversation. Their demeanor was not only disarming, but also made Alex's ploy seem petty and small in comparison. After a considerable delay, a waiter finally approached their table with a tray of appetizers. He apologized profusely for the wait, his eyes flicking nervously towards Alex, who was watching the scene unfold. Samuel simply smiled and nodded, accepting the apology with an understanding expression. "No problem," he said in a calm voice. "We understand." Lisa echoed his sentiment, adding, "We appreciate your effort." There was not a trace of irritation in their words, only kindness and patience. The waiter's relief was almost palpable. He placed the dishes on the table and quickly retreated, knowing that Alex's eyes were still on him. Despite all of Alex's attempts, Samuel and Lisa were showing nothing but grace under pressure. They were not allowing Alex's bias to ruin their evening. Instead, they were enjoying every moment, savoring each other's presence, as if the rest of the world, including Alex's petty strategies, did not matter. Alex felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had expected them to react differently, to show annoyance, to validate his belief that they did not belong here. But instead, they were proving him wrong in the most graceful manner possible. It made him uneasy, as if he was losing control of his carefully constructed world. Le Magnifique was supposed to be a place where he determined who fit in, but Samuel and Lisa were challenging that notion just by being themselves. The kitchen staff, who were aware of Alex's directive, exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen difficult guests before, and they had dealt with delays, but there was something about this particular situation that felt wrong. The couple's patience and kindness were unsettling, highlighting the unfairness of the entire scheme. Some of the younger waitstaff even found themselves quietly rooting for Samuel and Lisa, admiring how they handled the situation with such dignity. Finally, the main course arrived, again significantly delayed compared to other tables. Samuel and Lisa looked at their meals with delight, as if they had not been waiting for nearly twice the usual time. They thanked the waiter sincerely, and then, without a hint of complaint, they began to eat. Lisa took a small bite, smiling at Samuel, who returned her gaze with warmth. The scene was almost surreal to Alex. He had expected anger, frustration, maybe even an argument, but all he saw was contentment. Bookmark back. Their ability to rise above his attempts to belittle them left Alex feeling strangely vulnerable. It wasn't supposed to go like this. They were supposed to leave, to feel they didn't belong, but instead they seemed more comfortable in Le Magnifique than Alex himself. As he watched them from across the room, Alex couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that his carefully maintained power over this space was slipping through his fingers. And there was nothing he could do about it. The tension that had been simmering throughout the evening finally came to a boil. Alex, no longer able to watch from the sidelines, approached Samuel and Lisa's table with deliberate steps. He maintained a smile that was perfectly polite, but the tightness in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. He wanted them to feel it, to understand that they did not belong in this space that he had so carefully cultivated. "I hope everything is to your satisfaction," Alex said, his voice almost too controlled. He stood with his hands behind his back, as if trying to remind them of his authority over this place. The smile on his face while still in place had become an almost forced mask. Samuel looked up at Alex, his expression calm. "The food is wonderful, thank you," he replied evenly, his voice carrying an air of sincerity that made Alex's stomach twist. Lisa nodded in agreement, her eyes meeting Alex's with an unflinching gaze. There was a pause. Alex's eyes narrowed slightly, and he spoke again, his words carefully chosen but laced with condescension. "I'm pleased to hear that. You know, our restaurant has always prided itself on maintaining a certain atmosphere. We do our best to ensure all our guests are comfortable and in the company of like-minded individuals." Lisa raised an eyebrow, catching the underlying message. She smiled, her tone unwavering. "That's precisely why we came here," she said, her voice light, but her words deliberate. We heard La Magnifique was known for its exceptional service and welcoming ambiance. Samuel leaned forward slightly, his eyes still on Alex, refusing to be intimidated. It certainly lived up to its reputation, he added, his tone both appreciative and challenging. The confidence in his voice only served to deepen the tension. He was making it clear that they were not naive to what was happening, but they were also not going to be rattled. Alex felt his frustration bubble beneath the surface. He had hoped to intimidate them into leaving, to make them feel as if they were out of place. Instead, Samuel and Lisa were countering his insinuations with poise and grace, standing their ground without raising their voices or losing their composure. The couple's calm confidence was something Alex found infuriating. Every attempt he made to unsettle them seemed to roll off without effect. The room around them continued to buzz with activity, servers moving deftly between tables, patrons laughing and clinking glasses, but in that moment, it felt as though the only people in the room were Alex, Samuel, and Lisa. The tension between them was almost tangible, an invisible line that divided their perspectives. On one side stood Alex, desperately trying to preserve the exclusivity of La Magnifique, while on the other were Samuel and Lisa, unflinching in their right to be there. Lisa looked at Alex thoughtfully, her eyes not breaking contact. "You know, Alex," she said, using his name deliberately, making it personal. "Spaces like this, places that value sophistication and grace, should be accessible to everyone who appreciates them, don't you think?" Her words were gentle, yet the message was unmistakable. For a moment, Alex's carefully constructed facade faltered. The directness of Lisa's statement caught him off guard. He had expected them to either ignore his insinuations or to react defensively. But instead, Lisa had turned his own narrative against him. She was suggesting that the very values he claimed to uphold, sophistication and grace, were the qualities that they themselves embodied. It was a statement that left him with no easy rebuttal. Alex cleared his throat, his smile fading slightly as he struggled to find a response. "Of course," he finally said, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "We value all our guests." Samuel smiled, and there was something knowing in his eyes. "Good to hear," he said simply, before turning his attention back to Lisa, effectively ending the conversation on his terms. Lisa reached for her glass of water, her movements slow and deliberate, as if to show that nothing Alex said or did could disrupt their evening. Alex lingered for a moment longer, feeling a strange sense of defeat settle in his chest. He had approached them intending to assert his authority, to make them feel like they didn't belong, but instead he was the one feeling out of place. The power dynamic he had so confidently relied on was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to regain it. As he turned and walked away, Alex could feel the eyes of his staff on him. He knew they had been watching, and he could sense their silent judgment. The young waiters, in particular, exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of sympathy for Samuel and Lisa and a growing discomfort with Alex's behavior. It was becoming increasingly clear that his attempts to undermine the couple were not only failing, but were also exposing a side of himself that he had always kept hidden, an insecure man whose prejudices were rooted in his own fears. Samuel and Lisa, on the other hand, resumed their conversation, their composure unbroken. They spoke softly to each other, their smiles genuine as they shared a quiet laugh. It was as though the confrontation with Alex had never happened, or rather, as though it had only served to reinforce their determination to enjoy the evening. They knew what Alex had been trying to do, but they refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing them affected. Lisa glanced across the room at Alex's retreating figure and then turned back to Samuel, her smile widening. "It's a beautiful night," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Samuel nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "It is," he agreed. The couple's love and confidence were undeniable, and it was clear that nothing Alex did could change that. Bookmark. The encounter left a lingering sense of tension in the air, but it was Samuel and Lisa who emerged victorious. They had faced Alex's challenge head-on, not with anger or hostility, but with dignity and an unshakable sense of belonging. And as Alex retreated into the shadows of his own restaurant, it was clear that he was the one who felt like an outsider in the very space he had created. With the tension from their confrontation with Alex slowly dissipating, Samuel and Lisa took a deep breath, shared a reassuring smile, and turned their focus back to the true purpose of their evening, celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary. They had chosen the Magnifique for this special night, not because of its exclusivity, but because they wanted an elegant, memorable experience together, something to honor their 10 years of love, resilience, and shared dreams. The treatment they had received from Alex was unfortunate, but it would not be allowed to overshadow the beauty of this milestone. Candles flickered gently on their table, casting a warm, golden glow that softened the atmosphere around them, filling the air with a subtle hint of vanilla and jasmine. Samuel smiled at Lisa, his eyes reflecting the light of the candles, and gently took her hand across the table. "To us," he said, his voice tender, filled with both pride and affection. Lisa's face brightened, her eyes glistening as she looked back at him. "To us," she echoed, her voice steady, yet layered with emotion that spoke volumes of the love they shared. The couple's hands remained intertwined, a gesture of connection that seemed to create a bubble of intimacy and warmth around them, shutting out the coldness of Alex's prejudice and the judgmental gazes they had encountered. In that moment, it was just Samuel and Lisa, two people who had weathered storms together and emerged stronger, whose love had only deepened with time. They spoke in soft tones, recalling moments from their past decade together, trips they had taken, the challenges they had overcome, the laughter they had shared. Samuel chuckled as he recounted one of their early road trips, a time when they got hopelessly lost and ended up discovering a beautiful little town they had never planned to visit. Lisa smiled, squeezing his hand gently as she remembered how they had danced in the town square that evening to a local band playing under the stars. "I'd get lost with you all over again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with sincerity. Samuel's heart swelled at her words, and he leaned forward to kiss her hand, savoring the love that had been their anchor for 10 years. Around them the restaurant buzzed with activity, plates clinking, silverware scraping delicately, laughter from other tables, but Samuel and Lisa remained entirely in their own world. The noise faded into the background as they focused on each other, their smiles and shared glances unbroken. The candles on their table flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move to the rhythm of their love. The main course, though delayed, had finally arrived, but it was more of a formality than the main event. It was clear that, for Samuel and Lisa, the true feast was in their conversation, their memories, and the promise of what lay ahead. Every bite they took was accompanied by a smile, a touch, or a shared look that spoke of contentment and gratitude. They toasted their years together, their glasses clinking gently above the glowing candlelight, a small but meaningful gesture that celebrated their journey. Lisa looked across the table at Samuel, her expression softening. "I know tonight hasn't gone exactly as planned," she said, her voice carrying a note of humor. Samuel nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "No, but it's still perfect," he replied, his voice unwavering. He paused, his gaze meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "Because it's with you." Lisa felt her eyes misting over, and she blinked to keep the tears from spilling. She knew he meant it. The moments that mattered most weren't dictated by where they were or who tried to disrupt them, but by who they were with. And with Samuel, every moment was special, no matter the setting. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her smile deepening as she said, "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." The love between them was palpable, a quiet but powerful force that made even the grandest gestures seem small in comparison. As they continued their celebration, it became abundantly clear that no amount of condescension or prejudice could touch them. They had come to La Magnifique to celebrate a decade of love, and they were doing exactly that. Their warmth and resilience seemed to transform the space around them, making their table a beacon of what true elegance and grace looked like. Alex, watching from a distance, could see that his attempts to make them feel unwelcome had failed spectacularly. His jaw clenched, and he let out a quiet sigh, the frustration of seeing his plans unravel evident in his tense posture. Instead of seeing discomfort, he saw two people who were completely and unapologetically happy, whose love was a shield against the small-mindedness he had tried to impose on them. And though Alex wouldn't admit it, he felt a pang of something. Envy, perhaps, or regret. For here were two people who had what he lacked, a connection so genuine that it could not be shaken. As the evening wore on, Samuel and Lisa continued to bask in the warmth of each other's presence. The candlelight flickered gently, the shadows growing longer, but the joy in their eyes only seemed to brighten. They were here to celebrate their love, and nothing, not the delays, not the prejudice, not even Alex's failed attempts at exclusion, could take that away from them. In the face of adversity, they remained resilient, and the love they shared became a silent testament to the power of grace and belonging. As Samuel and Lisa continued to enjoy their evening, Alex found his frustration bubbling over. The couple's calmness and unwavering demeanor, their serene smiles and effortless composure, were eating away at him, gnawing at his sense of control. It felt as though every polite exchange and every moment of their unshaken poise was a direct affront to his authority. He could no longer tolerate their presence. Not after all, his efforts to make them uncomfortable had failed. It was as though their quiet confidence was mocking his authority, challenging everything he believed about who should be welcomed at La Magnifique. With a hardened expression, Alex strode over to their table, his eyes burning with a barely concealed hostility. The smile that had previously masked his disdain was gone, replaced by a steely glare. He stopped beside their table, and with an edge in his voice, said, "I think it's time for you to leave." Samuel looked up at him, his expression calm, though a flicker of disbelief crossed his face. Lisa's hand remained in Samuel's, her grip tightening just slightly as she took in Alex's words. She exchanged a glance with Samuel, and without a word, they both began to rise from their seats. They weren't going to argue, nor would they let Alex see them rattled. The tension around the table was thick, drawing the attention of nearby patrons who exchanged confused glances. Their brows furrowed and whispers growing louder as they tried to make sense of what was happening. Some looked at Samuel and Lisa with sympathy, while others glanced at Alex with unease, sensing the shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. Alex's eyes followed Samuel and Lisa as they gathered their belongings, his gaze filled with a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps uncertainty or even regret. But Samuel and Lisa, poised and dignified, showed no signs of resentment. They simply stood together, their heads held high as they quietly left the restaurant. As they exited, a heavy silence settled in the wake of their departure, and the atmosphere of La Magnifique seemed to shift. The elegance that Alex so fiercely guarded now felt hollow, tainted by the ugliness of his actions. The eyes of the staff and other diners bore into him, their unspoken judgments louder than any words. Some filled with disappointment, others with disdain, and a few with outright disapproval, questioning how the elegance of La Magnifique had come to this. And for the first time, Alex felt as though he had lost control, not just of the situation, but of the very essence of what his restaurant stood for. Samuel and Lisa walked out of La Magnifique with quiet dignity, their hands still clasped together. Though there was a sense of hurt that lingered in the air, they refused to let it overshadow their resolve. They had faced prejudice before, but this time they were determined that it would not end there. Outside the restaurant, they paused, turning to look back at the grand façade of La Magnifique. Its ornate architecture and glowing chandeliers, a stark contrast to the coldness they had just experienced within. Their eyes held no resentment, only a firm determination. This experience had been painful, but it was also a reminder of the change they wanted to see in the world. Samuel gave Lisa a reassuring nod, and she returned it with a knowing smile, one that spoke of their shared determination to turn this incident into a positive force for change. They both understood that this moment was not an end but a beginning, a chance to turn their personal hurt into a greater purpose. Standing there, under the glow of the streetlights, Samuel and Lisa looked at La Magnifique, not with defeat, but with a renewed sense of purpose. They planned to use their platform to raise awareness about discriminatory practices, connect with community leaders, and push for changes in local policies that would foster inclusivity. They would use this experience to advocate for equality, By organizing community events, working with local businesses to adopt inclusive policies, and sharing their story publicly to raise awareness, ensuring that no one else would have to face what they did. A few days after the incident at Le Magnifique, Alex was sitting in his office, sipping his morning coffee. He had managed to convince himself that what happened with Samuel and Lisa was just a minor blip, something that wouldn't affect his precious restaurant or reputation. He believed that the situation had been dealt with, and Le Magnifique's exclusivity would continue to shine as ever. But as he scrolled through his emails, an unexpected envelope on his desk caught his attention. The envelope bore the logo of a prestigious law firm, renowned for handling high-profile corporate deals and representing some of the most influential clients in the business world, one that Alex had heard of but never dealt with personally. He raised an eyebrow, curious. He tore open the envelope, pulling out a letter printed on fine, expensive stationery. As he began to read, a smile slowly spread across his face. The letter was from a legal representative of a potential investor, a mystery buyer, who expressed a keen interest in acquiring Le Magnifique and other properties in his restaurant chain. The offer was generous, much more than Alex had anticipated for any buyout proposal. It spoke of the investor's admiration for the brand Alex had built, its exclusivity, and its image of high luxury. Alex's ego swelled as he read, savoring every carefully chosen word. He could already imagine the possibilities, expanding his influence, perhaps even stepping away with a tidy sum to embark on something bigger. The thought of a lucrative deal, of turning over Le Magnifique for a profit, made him feel as though he was still in control, still the one calling the shots. Alex leaned back in his leather chair, absent-mindedly toying with the expensive fountain pen on his desk. He glanced around his office, the shelves lined with awards and photographs, reminders of his journey, of everything he had built from the ground up. Selling the restaurant chain might just be the next step toward an even more prestigious future, he thought. After all, what was more powerful than creating something so valuable that others would line up to buy it? He set the letter down and picked up the fountain pen, giving it a quick twirl in his fingers before clicking it open. He couldn't help but smile, imagining himself signing a deal that would further solidify his success, proving once again that he was ahead of the game. The investor remained anonymous, but Alex didn't care much. In his mind, only someone with excellent taste would want to own Le Magnifique. Little did Alex know, the investor behind the generous offer was none other than Samuel and Lisa. They had decided that instead of allowing prejudice to taint their lives, they would find a way to turn it into an opportunity for change. By buying Le Magnifique, they intended to transform it into a place that truly embodied luxury and inclusivity, where everyone could feel welcome, regardless of background. Samuel and Lisa's plan was already in motion, and they were determined to see it through. The letter on Alex's desk was only the beginning, a carefully laid step in a much larger journey to redefine what true elegance and hospitality looked like, focusing on creating an environment that blended luxury with genuine inclusivity, where everyone, regardless of status or background, could feel celebrated and valued. As Alex signed the initial agreement, his smile of satisfaction was a stark contrast to the quiet, powerful resolve of the couple he had underestimated. The real transformation was only just beginning, and Alex had no idea how much his world was about to change. The day of the meeting arrived, and Alex found himself standing in the pristine lobby of the law office, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He had come with high expectations, envisioning a discussion with a seasoned traditional investor, someone who understood the prestige of Le Magnifique and would want to expand its reach while maintaining its exclusivity. He had no reason to think otherwise. The letter had promised a lucrative deal, and Alex was ready to take the next step. A well-dressed assistant escorted Alex to the conference room, an impressive space with floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. The room was bathed in natural light, which highlighted the sleek, modern furnishings and added to the sense of importance. Alex walked in confidently, his eyes scanning the room, but his steps faltered when he saw who was already seated at the long table. There, on the opposite side, sat Samuel and Lisa, their posture composed and expressions calm. For a moment, Alex stood frozen, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. The couple, the very people he had tried to push away from La Magnifique, were now here, dressed impeccably and looking every bit the part of successful investors. Samuel and Lisa exchanged a brief smile, their hands clasping each other momentarily in a gesture of support. Alex's stomach twisted as he realized the truth. They were the mystery buyers. A mix of disbelief and panic surged through him, his thoughts racing as he struggled to comprehend how this couple, whom he had dismissed so easily, now held the upper hand. The shock of their presence hit him like a punch to the gut. He had expected a powerful investor, but never had he imagined it would be them, the couple he had so blatantly dismissed and underestimated. The assistant gestured for Alex to take a seat, and he did so mechanically, his mind still reeling. Samuel and Lisa greeted him politely, their voices steady and professional, betraying none of the tension that must have lingered from their previous encounter. Alex forced a smile, though it felt hollow, and he could feel his grip tightening around the fountain pen he had brought with him, the same pen he imagined signing the deal with. "Mr. Johnson?" Samuel began, his tone courteous yet firm. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us today. We believe there is significant potential in what you have built with Le Magnifique, and we would like to discuss how we can take it forward together." Alex nodded, but his thoughts were in turmoil. He felt the balance of power shift, slipping away from his grasp. This was supposed to be his moment, to sell the restaurant chain on his own terms, to dictate how things would proceed. But now, sitting across from Samuel and Lisa, he realized that he was no longer in control. They were confident, composed, and unyielding. They had come prepared, and the fact that they had orchestrated this entire scenario left Alex feeling blindsided. Lisa leaned forward slightly, her gaze meeting Alex's with a calm intensity. "We believe in creating a space where everyone feels welcome," she said, her words deliberate. "Luxury doesn't need to be exclusive to be meaningful. We want La Magnifique to be a place that embodies both elegance and inclusivity." The words struck Alex harder than he expected. He had always prided himself on the exclusivity of his restaurant, on maintaining an air of unattainable luxury. But now, here were Samuel and Lisa speaking of inclusivity, of a vision that directly challenged everything he had stood for. He felt his throat tighten, a sense of helplessness creeping in, as he realized that this meeting was not going to be the straightforward transaction he had imagined. The conversation continued, Samuel and Lisa laying out their vision with clarity and purpose, while Alex listened, his outward demeanor attempting to mask the storm of emotions within. He forced himself to engage, to respond, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being outmaneuvered. The power dynamic had shifted, and Alex could feel himself being slowly edged out of the very thing he had created. As the meeting drew to a close, Samuel extended his hand across the table, a gesture of partnership. Alex hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it, his smile strained. The handshake felt like an acknowledgement, not of a deal, but of a shift in fate. Samuel and Lisa had taken the lead, and for the first time, Alex was left to follow. The meeting resumed the next day, and Alex sat across from Samuel and Lisa once again. This time, the atmosphere was different. It was charged, almost suffocating, as they prepared to discuss the conditions of the deal. Alex had come to the table with a reluctant acceptance, expecting a compromise, a phased transition perhaps where his role would gradually diminish, but he wasn't prepared for how harsh the terms were about to be. Samuel spoke first, his tone polite but firm. "Mr. Johnson, we appreciate what you've done with La Magnifique, and we respect the legacy you've built. However, to ensure that the new direction for the restaurant is implemented smoothly, we believe it would be best if you stepped away entirely from its management." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We are prepared to make a generous financial offer, but this will come with the condition that you have no further involvement, either in an advisory or executive role." Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He blinked, momentarily stunned. He had anticipated changes, perhaps a transition period where his role would diminish, but being asked to walk away entirely was something he hadn't imagined. It felt like a slap in the face, as though everything he had worked for was being taken away without any consideration for his years of dedication. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "I see," he replied slowly, his voice tight. "And is this non-negotiable?" Lisa nodded, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. "It is, Mr. Johnson. For us to fully realize our vision for La Magnifique, we need a clean break. The restaurant needs to be reimagined, and for that, we need to be able to make decisions without any legacy constraints." Her voice was calm, each word deliberate, and it left no room for misinterpretation. Alex could feel his pulse quickening, a flush of warmth creeping up his neck as he struggled to maintain his cool demeanor. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrests of his chair. The words coming from Lisa were not just business. They were an unequivocal statement that his time was over. He couldn't hide the irritation in his eyes, and it took all his self-control to stop his voice from shaking. "I understand your position," he said, barely managing to keep his tone level. "But surely, given my experience, I could still contribute in some capacity." Samuel shook his head, his face impassive. "We value your experience, Mr. Johnson, but the future of La Magnifique is one that needs to be shaped without ties to the past. We want to honor what you've built, but the direction we envision requires complete autonomy. We're offering you a chance to walk away with your head held high with significant financial compensation." He gestured to the paperwork in front of him, emphasizing the offer that lay before Alex. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Alex looked down at the documents, his name written across pages of fine print. It was all there, an offer far beyond what he had imagined, but with the condition that he must relinquish any hold over the place that had once defined him. The ink seemed to blur as he stared at the words, his thoughts clouded with anger, hurt, and an overwhelming sense of loss. He had built La Magnifique from nothing and poured his heart and soul into every detail. And now he was being told that he no longer had a place in the future of the very thing he had created. Lisa broke the silence, her voice softer, almost as if she was trying to ease the blow. "We know this must feel like an abrupt end to something you've dedicated your life to," she added, her tone carrying a hint of empathy. "We understand that this may be difficult for you, Mr. Johnson, but please know that our goal is to take La Magnifique to new heights, to create something even more impactful. And for that, we need to begin with a fresh slate." Alex looked up at her, his eyes betraying the hurt he felt. He forced a smile, though it barely reached his eyes. "Of course," he said. "I suppose that makes sense." His voice sounded hollow to his own ears. He could see that Samuel and Lisa were resolute, and no amount of negotiation would change their minds. He was cornered. There was no other option but to accept. Taking a deep breath, Alex reached for the fountain pen that lay on the table. He picked it up slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. He knew this was it. The final step. He had to let go. The realization hit him like a wave, and for a moment he wondered if he could actually go through with it. But he knew he had no choice. Holding on to La Magnifique would only lead to more conflict and more bitterness. And so, he signed. The scratch of the pen on paper felt like a final, irrevocable act. He could feel his throat tighten as he signed each page, his heart sinking with every stroke of ink. He avoided looking at Samuel and Lisa, not wanting to see the satisfaction that might be in their eyes. Instead, he focused on the paperwork, each signature feeling like he was letting go of a part of himself. When it was done, he set the pen down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the documents before him. "Well, that's that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He forced another smile, but it was strained and filled with unspoken pain. Samuel extended his hand, and Alex shook it, though his grip lacked the firmness it once had. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson," Samuel said, his voice calm. "We appreciate your cooperation, and we hope that you find success in whatever you choose to do next." Alex nodded, but his thoughts were distant. He felt a hollowness inside, a void left by the sudden severance from La Magnifique. He looked at Lisa, who gave him a courteous nod, her expression still calm and composed. They were polite, professional, and unyielding. They had won, and there was nothing left for him to do but accept it. As Alex stood up to leave, he cast one last glance at the paperwork on the table, his name signed on every page. It was over. The legacy he had built was now in the hands of others, and he had no place in its future. He walked out of the conference room, his steps heavy, feeling the weight of everything he had lost pressing down on him. Behind him, Samuel and Lisa began discussing their next steps, their voices fading as the door closed behind him. It was the end of an era, and Alex knew that nothing would ever be the same again. After the meeting, Alex found himself back in his office, the room bathed in dim, yellowish light from a single desk lamp. The shadows seemed to swallow everything around him, emphasizing the emptiness that he felt within. The silence of the room was heavy, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. He sank into his chair, staring blankly at the scattered papers on his desk. The decision weighed on him, far more than he had imagined. Alex picked up one of the financial projections that Samuel and Lisa had provided. The numbers were impressive, almost absurdly generous. He could take the money, retire comfortably, and maybe even start something new. It was, on paper, an excellent deal. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about pride, identity, and everything Magnifique had come to mean for him over the years. It was his creation, his legacy, and the thought of stepping away entirely was like cutting away a part of his soul. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, his eyes closing as he let out a long, exhausted sigh. He remembered the early days of Magnifique, the sleepless nights, the endless planning, the sacrifices. He had poured his life into this restaurant, and now it felt like all of that was slipping away. The faces of his staff flashed through his mind, those who had been with him since the beginning, who had believed in his vision. What would they think of him now? Would they see him as someone who simply gave up? The more he thought about it, the more the bitterness rose within him. He felt trapped by the mounting financial pressures, the demands of the investors, and the realization that any attempt to fight back would only make things worse. It was as if every door had been closed, and the only path left led to a painful surrender. Samuel and Lisa had made it clear there would be no compromises. They wanted him out, completely and definitively. The financial offer was generous, but the condition was unforgiving. He had to choose between his pride and his future security. A part of him wanted to reject the offer outright, to fight until the very end. But deep down, he knew it was futile. The investors wanted a clean break, and any resistance would only tarnish whatever dignity he had left. Alex opened his eyes and gazed at the framed photographs on the wall, moments of success, of joy, of what once felt like unshakable triumph. He stood up, walked over to one of the photos and took it down. It was from the grand opening of Magnifique, years ago. He was younger, smiling broadly, his arm wrapped around one of his first head chefs, the restaurant bustling in the background. It had been the culmination of years of effort, a dream realized. Now it felt like that dream was being forcibly put to rest. He returned to his desk, the photo still in his hand, and sat down heavily. The offer from Samuel and Lisa was the only way to save some semblance of his reputation. He could walk away with his head held high, at least publicly. To the world, it would look like a successful business decision, a lucrative buyout. No one would know the turmoil behind closed doors, the sleepless nights spent grappling with the idea of letting go. Alex placed the photo on his desk and stared at it, his eyes searching for something, some sign, some inspiration, anything to make the decision easier. He knew what he had to do, but it didn't make it hurt any less. The thought of not being part of Magnifique anymore felt like a wound that would never fully heal. He tried to picture his life without it, but the vision was blurry, uncertain, and frighteningly empty. He reached for the documents that had been left for him to sign, the official acceptance of the terms. His hands trembled as he held the pen. It was a simple action, signing his name, but it felt monumental, as if he was signing away a part of himself. He hesitated, the tip of the pen hovering over the paper, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind screamed at him to stop, to think it over just one more time. But he knew there was no more time to think. He had already lost control, and dragging this out would only make the pain worse. With a shaky breath, Alex lowered the pen and began to sign. Each stroke of ink felt heavy, deliberate, like a final farewell. He signed each page, his name flowing across the paper, binding him to an agreement that he desperately wished he could walk away from. When he finished, he set the pen down and leaned back, the documents neatly stacked in front of him. It was done. Alex sat there for a long moment, staring at the signed papers. The room seemed even darker now, the lamp's glow casting long shadows that seemed to reach out and swallow the light. He felt hollow, as if the decision had drained something vital from within him. Slowly, he stood, picking up the photograph once more. He looked at it, his thumb brushing over the glass, and then carefully placed it in the drawer of his desk. It was time to move on, even if he wasn't ready. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Life continued to unfold outside, a steady stream of activity, while his own seemed to have been caught in a standstill. He knew he had to find a way forward, to make peace with this decision. But in that moment, all he felt was loss. The weight of what he had given up pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. But as he stood there, watching the city, Alex took a deep breath. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end, just the beginning of something new. He didn't know what that new thing was, but he had to believe that there was still something out there for him. He had built Le Magnifique from nothing once. Perhaps he could build something again. The day of the signing had arrived. Alex sat at the long, polished table in the law office, the air heavy with tension. Across from him, Samuel and Lisa sat with their lawyer, their demeanor calm and composed. They exchanged polite smiles, but there was an unspoken understanding, a sense of triumph on their part and of resignation on Alex's. The spacious conference room, with its wide glass windows and sleek decor, seemed to emphasize how small and powerless Alex felt at that moment. The lawyer slid the documents across the table towards Alex. He picked up the papers, his eyes scanning the terms for what felt like the 100th time. Every word seemed to blur together, but he knew what it all meant. It was the official end of his time at Le Magnifique. The restaurant that had been his pride, his life's work, would now belong to someone else. Samuel and Lisa's names stood boldly on the paper, a stark reminder of the reality he faced. Alex took a deep breath and picked up the pen. His hand trembled slightly as he hovered over the signature line. He could feel Lisa and Samuel's eyes on him, watching his every move. He looked up briefly, meeting their gaze. Lisa gave him a courteous smile, kind almost, but there was an undeniable glimmer of victory in her eyes. Samuel remained silent, his expression unreadable but confident. With a heavy heart, Alex signed his name. The ink flowed smoothly, and with each stroke it felt as though he was relinquishing a piece of his identity. He signed each page, his mind numb to the finality of it all. Once he finished, he put the pen down, his fingers brushing against the cool metal, as if reluctant to let go. It was over. The restaurant, his dream, was no longer his. Samuel and Lisa exchanged a quick glance, before Samuel extended his hand across the table. "Thank you, Alex," he said, his tone respectful but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "We appreciate everything you've built. We'll take good care of it." Alex forced a smile, his lips barely moving. "I'm sure you will," he replied, though the words felt hollow. He shook Samuel's hand, the gesture feeling more like a formality than anything meaningful. Lisa followed her handshake firm, her eyes never leaving his. "We wish you all the best, Alex," she said. Her voice was warm, but there was a finality in it that cut through him. The lawyer gathered the signed documents, stacking them neatly and placing them in a folder. "That concludes everything," he said, his tone businesslike, as if this were just another deal. To Alex, it was anything but. He nodded, pushing his chair back and standing. The room felt stifling, the air too thick to breathe. He needed to get out, to escape the polite smiles and the cold, transactional nature of it all. As he turned to leave, Alex paused for a moment, looking back at Samuel and Lisa. They were already discussing plans with their lawyer, their focus no longer on him. He realized then just how quickly he had become irrelevant in the space that used to be his entire world. He remembered the bustling nights at Le Magnifique, greeting guests with a proud smile, the clinking of glasses, and the warm glow of the chandeliers. Those moments of joy and fulfillment now felt like distant memories, replaced by the cold reality of what he had lost. The realization stung, a deep, aching bitterness settling in his chest. He had built Le Magnifique from the ground up, and now he was walking away with nothing but memories and regrets. He left the conference room, his footsteps echoing down the polished hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. By the time he reached the elevator, he felt drained, as if the life had been sucked out of him. He pressed the button, the soft ding of the elevator arriving barely registering in his mind. The doors closed, and Alex caught a glimpse of himself on the reflective surface. He looked tired, defeated, an empty shell of the man who had once stood proudly in his restaurant, greeting guests and overseeing every detail. He closed his eyes, leaning against the cool metal wall of the elevator. He had made the decision, and there was no going back. He had to find a way to accept it, to move on, but the path forward seemed bleak and uncertain. When he stepped out of the building, the bright afternoon sun hit his face, momentarily blinding him. He squinted, looking around as the world moved on without him. People passed by, unaware of the battle he had just lost, of the dreams that had just slipped from his grasp. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the sense of loss was overwhelming. Alex walked to his car, the distance feeling longer than it ever had before. He opened the door and sat down, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he stared ahead. The city bustled around him, full of life and energy, but he felt detached from it all. The restaurant had been his anchor, his purpose, and now he was adrift, unsure of where to go or what to do next. For a long moment, he simply sat there, letting the reality of what had happened sink in. The world outside continued, indifferent to his pain. He knew he had to move forward, to find something new, but the thought of starting over was daunting. He had poured everything into Magnifique, and now, with nothing left, he felt hollow. Slowly, Alex started the car, the engine humming to life. He took one last look at the law office building in his rearview mirror before pulling away. It was done. He had signed away his dream, and now all that was left was to figure out how to live without it. The news of the sale spread quickly, reaching every corner of the community that had once admired Le Magnifique. It wasn't just a simple business transaction to the people who knew the restaurant. It was a story of betrayal, of poetic justice, and of the rise and fall of a man who had built something iconic. As word got out about who the new owners were, the narrative surrounding Alex shifted dramatically. People began to talk about the way Alex had run Le Magnifique, his exclusivity, and the whispers of subtle discrimination that had always lingered in the background. The story of Samuel and Lisa, a couple who had once faced subtle discrimination at Le Magnifique but rose above it to buy the very establishment that had slighted them, caught the public's imagination. Samuel and Lisa had once visited the restaurant for an anniversary, only to be treated dismissively by Alex, who had seated them near the kitchen and ignored their presence. Despite that experience, they had returned in triumph, transforming the space into something greater than Alex ever allowed it to be. It was a compelling story of karma and resilience, and the media wasted no time capitalizing on it. Headlines appeared in local newspapers and online articles: "Poetic Justice," "Couple Buys Restaurant That Turned Them Away," and "Le Magnifique's New Chapter, A Story of Redemption." The tone was clear. Samuel and Lisa were painted as the heroes, while Alex was depicted as the fallen mogul who got what he deserved. News outlets featured images of Samuel and Lisa standing proudly in front of Le Magnifique, their smiles full of promise for the future. The contrast with Alex's hollow expression from the day of the signing couldn't have been starker. Alex could do nothing but watch from the sidelines as his reputation crumbled. The media coverage was relentless, and it seemed like every day there was a new story or opinion piece dissecting his downfall. Old patrons who had once praised Le Magnifique now spoke openly about the elitist atmosphere, recalling instances that, in hindsight, seemed to confirm the rumors about Alex's prejudice. Customers who had once fought for a reservation at his restaurant were now distancing themselves, their loyalty shifting to Samuel and Lisa, who promised a new vision for the establishment, one of inclusivity and warmth. Even Alex's personal relationships began to fracture. Friends who had once admired his success now avoided him, unsure of how to face the man who had become a symbol of outdated values. He tried reaching out to a few of his closest confidants, but the responses were cold, curt, or simply non-existent. The whispers of his arrogance and prejudice had reached them too, and Alex found himself increasingly isolated. The very community that had once celebrated him now looked at him with disdain, or worse, indifference. One afternoon, Alex sat alone in his small apartment, a far cry from the spacious home he had once owned. The dim light filtered through the curtains as he flipped through a newspaper. There, on the front page, was a picture of Samuel and Lisa, standing at the entrance of Magnifique, their smiles bright. The headline reading, "A New Era for Magnifique, Open Doors for All." Alex's eyes lingered on the photograph, his chest tightening with a mix of bitterness and regret. He could almost hear the laughter and chatter that must have filled the restaurant now, sounds that had once brought him pride, but now only reminded him of what he had lost. He turned the page, hoping to avoid the growing ache in his heart, but the next article was no better. It was an opinion piece, detailing how Magnifique had always been a symbol of exclusion, how its previous owner had perpetuated an unwelcoming environment for those who didn't fit his narrow vision of elegance. The writer praised Samuel and Lisa for breaking down those barriers and for turning the restaurant into a place where everyone felt valued. Alex clenched his jaw, his eyes stinging as he forced himself to read every word. It was painful, but he couldn't look away. He needed to know how the world saw him now, how far he had fallen. The phone rang, breaking the heavy silence of the room. Alex reached for it, a flicker of hope sparking within him. Maybe it was one of his old friends, maybe someone still cared. But as he answered, the voice on the other end was not one of comfort. It was a journalist, seeking a comment on the recent changes at Magnifique. Alex hung up without a word, the spark of hope extinguished as quickly as it had appeared. He knew there was nothing he could say that would change the narrative now. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of his defeat only grew heavier. He avoided going out, not wanting to face the curious glances, or worse, the pitying looks from people who recognized him. The city that had once felt like his playground now felt foreign, hostile. He had lost more than just a restaurant. He had lost his place, a sense of belonging that came from being a respected figure in the community, his identity, and the respect of those around him. Samuel and Lisa, meanwhile, seemed to flourish. The articles continued to praise them, detailing the changes they were making to Magnifique. The restaurant was now hosting community events and charity dinners and offering more accessible menus. The exclusivity that Alex had once prided himself on was gone, replaced by an atmosphere of inclusivity and warmth. The transformation was undeniable, and the community embraced it wholeheartedly. Alex couldn't help but wonder what might have been if he had made different choices, if he had been more open and less rigid in his beliefs about what Magnifique should be. But those thoughts were futile, and he knew it. The past couldn't be changed, and the consequences of his actions were now his to bear. He had built something beautiful, but his own arrogance had led to its downfall. And now, all he could do was watch as someone else took what he had created and turned it into something even greater. He closed the newspaper, letting it drop onto the coffee table. The room was silent again, the weight of his solitude pressing down on him. He looked around at the bare walls and his sparse furniture. It was a far cry from the life he had once known, and the reality of it hit him all over again. He had fallen, and there was no one there to help him up. Bookmark. Alex leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes. The sounds of the bustling city drifted in through the window, cars honking, people chatting, laughter echoing from a distant street vendor, contrasting sharply with the stillness and emptiness he felt within. He felt disconnected from it all, a ghost of who he used to be. The world had moved on, and he was left behind, a relic of a past that no longer had a place in the present. Under Samuel and Lisa's leadership, Magnifique began its transformation, evolving from a symbol of exclusivity to one of inclusivity and warmth. One moment that symbolized this transformation was the introduction of Community Night, where the restaurant was filled with families and individuals enjoying a fine dining experience at an accessible price, breaking down the barriers that once existed. The changes they implemented were not just cosmetic. They represented a fundamental shift in the philosophy of the restaurant. Samuel and Lisa wanted Le Magnifique to be a place where everyone felt welcome, regardless of their background or status, whether they were young artists, local families, or business professionals. They worked tirelessly to ensure that the new version of the restaurant maintained its elegance while also opening its doors to a wider range of patrons. The first thing Samuel and Lisa did was revamp the restaurant's decor. Gone were the heavy drapes and dim lighting that had once given the place an air of elitist mystery. Instead, they opted for a lighter, more modern aesthetic. Large windows allowed natural light to flood the dining area during the day, creating a bright and inviting atmosphere. The walls were painted in soft, warm tones and adorned with artwork from local artists that celebrated diversity and community. Elegant chandeliers still hung from the ceiling, but their light was now softer, creating an ambiance that was both luxurious and approachable. The menu also saw a significant overhaul. Samuel and Lisa brought in a new head chef, someone who shared their vision of inclusivity and creativity. The dishes were reimagined to be more accessible, with a range of price points that allowed people from different walks of life to enjoy a fine dining experience. They introduced a community night once a week, where a special menu was offered at a reduced price, encouraging families and individuals who might have never considered dining at Le Magnifique to come and experience it for themselves. The food was still exquisite, crafted with the same attention to detail and quality, but the barrier to entry had been removed. Samuel and Lisa also made a point of hiring staff who were passionate about hospitality and who understood the importance of making every guest feel valued. They provided extensive training, not just in the technical aspects of service, but in empathy and community building. The staff was encouraged to engage with patrons, to learn their names, and to make personal connections. It wasn't long before regular customers began to feel like they were part of something special, a place where they were not just served, but truly welcomed. Word of the changes spread quickly, and soon Le Magnifique was bustling with a diverse array of guests. Families came in for celebrations, young couples visited for romantic dinners, and community groups held their gatherings there. The once exclusive restaurant was now a vibrant hub of activity, filled with laughter, conversation, and the clinking of glasses. The atmosphere was warm and alive, a stark contrast to the stifling formality that had once defined it. The community embraced the new Le Magnifique wholeheartedly. Samuel and Lisa hosted charity events and fundraisers, using the restaurant as a platform to support local causes. They organized cooking workshops for children, inviting them into the kitchen to learn from the chefs and fostering a love for food and creativity. They even dedicated a section of the restaurant to a community board where people could post events, announcements, and messages of support. It was no longer just a place to eat. It was a place where people connected, where memories were made, and where everyone felt they belonged. The impact of these changes was profound. Le Magnifique became more than just a restaurant. It became a symbol of positive transformation. It was proof that elegance didn't have to mean exclusivity, and that true luxury came from creating an environment where everyone felt valued. Samuel and Lisa's vision had turned the restaurant into a beacon of hope and progress, a place that celebrated diversity and community rather than shutting it out. For Samuel and Lisa, the journey was deeply personal. They had once been on the outside, looking in, and now they were at the heart of something meaningful. They took pride in knowing that they had turned a place that had once made them feel small into one that uplifted others. It was a powerful statement, not just to the community, but to themselves, that they could create change, that they could take something broken and make it whole again. Alex, watching from afar, could see the changes through the articles in the newspaper and the stories shared by former patrons. When he first saw the photos of the bustling new Le Magnifique, with families and diverse patrons filling the space, his heart sank. He felt an emptiness that gnawed at him, a stark realization that his version of the restaurant had never evoked such joy. The photos of the newly renovated Le Magnifique, filled with smiling faces of all kinds, were a stark reminder of what he had lost. He couldn't deny that the restaurant looked beautiful, more alive than it ever had been under his ownership. There was a pang of regret, a deep ache that came from knowing that Samuel and Lisa had succeeded where he had failed. They had found a way to maintain the restaurant's elegance while making it accessible, something he had never even considered. As he looked at the images of the community nights, the charity events, and the families enjoying their meals, Alex couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. There was bitterness, of course, but there was also a reluctant sense of admiration. Samuel and Lisa had done what he could not. They had made Le Magnifique into something truly great, something that mattered to people. And as much as it hurt to admit, he knew they deserved the success they were enjoying. Bookmark. The reformation of Le Magnifique was complete. It was no longer just a restaurant for the elite. It was a place for everyone. And in that transformation, it had found a new kind of prestige, one that wasn't built on exclusion, but on the genuine connections it fostered. Samuel and Lisa stood at the helm of this new chapter, their leadership a testament to the power of resilience, vision, and the belief that true success lies in lifting others up, not shutting them out. The news of Le Magnifique's transformation and success under Samuel and Lisa's leadership weighed heavily on Alex. Alone in his small apartment, he sat in the darkened living room, the only light coming from a lamp in the corner, casting a soft, dim glow. His eyes were fixed on an old photograph of himself taken on the opening night of Le Magnifique, his dream realized, his pride captured forever. But now, that moment felt like a lifetime ago, and the pride he once felt had withered away, leaving behind only regret. Alex leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling, his mind racing through the choices he had made. He remembered how he had once stood in that grand dining room, filled with confidence, certain of his vision for what Le Magnifique should be. He had thought of the restaurant as a sanctuary for the privileged, a place that exuded exclusivity and refined luxury. It had been his haven, a testament to his success and his desire to be recognized as part of the elite. But now, as he sat in the silence of his empty apartment, Alex could see those decisions for what they were: misguided, selfish, and ultimately destructive. He had built walls around Le Magnifique, believing that exclusivity equated to greatness. In doing so, he alienated not only potential patrons, but also the very essence of what could have made his restaurant truly special. He realized, with a bitter pang, that he had been too focused on creating an image rather than building a genuine experience for people to share. He thought of Samuel and Lisa, and how they had taken what he had built and made it better. They had opened the doors he had kept closed, welcomed the people he had turned away, and transformed Le Magnifique into a place that was full of life, warmth, and community. The photos of families enjoying their meals, of children laughing during the cooking workshops, and of diverse patrons gathered for community nights, all spoke of a joy that his version of Le Magnifique had never seen. He had failed to understand what true success was. It wasn't about keeping people out. It was about bringing them together. A deep sigh escaped his lips as Alex ran a hand over his face, his fingers brushing against the stubble on his chin. He knew that he had allowed his pride to cloud his judgment. He had been so caught up in the notion of exclusivity that he had forgotten the simple joy of sharing good food, of creating memories, and of being a part of something larger than himself. The weight of his arrogance, of the decisions he had made out of a desire to prove himself, now felt unbearable. There was a knock on the door, a gentle but unexpected sound that pulled Alex out of his thoughts. He hesitated for a moment, then stood up, setting the photograph down on the table. He opened the door to find an old friend, someone who had once been a regular at Le Magnifique, back when it was still his. The friend's face held a look of sympathy, as if they knew the turmoil Alex was going through. "I thought I'd check in on you," the friend said softly, offering a small smile. "I know it's been a rough time." Alex nodded, stepping aside to let them in. They sat down together in the living room, and for a while, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, filled with the unspoken understanding of what had been lost. Finally, Alex broke the silence, his voice quiet and tinged with sadness. "I made so many mistakes," he admitted, his eyes focused on the floor. "I thought I was building something great, but I see now that I was just building walls." His friend listened, nodding, but said nothing, letting Alex speak. The words came slowly, each one carrying the weight of his regret. He spoke of his pride, his fear of losing control, and the way he had treated people, not just Samuel and Lisa, but so many others who had walked through the doors of La Magnifique only to be met with judgment. He spoke of the emptiness he felt now, of how he wished he could go back and do things differently. "But you can't," his friend finally said, their voice gentle but firm. "None of us can. All you can do is learn from it, Alex. All you can do is try to be better now." Alex looked up, meeting his friend's eyes, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, he felt a glimmer of something other than regret. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. A sense that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for him to find a new path. He had lost La Magnifique, and he had lost the respect he once held. But perhaps there was still something left for him to build. Something that mattered, not because it was exclusive or prestigious, but because it was genuine. As the night wore on, Alex and his friend talked, the conversation shifting from regret to reflection, and finally to the possibility of what could come next. The road ahead was uncertain, and Alex knew that the mistakes he had made would stay with him. But he also knew that he couldn't let those mistakes define him forever. He had to find a way to move forward, to take the lessons he had learned and use them to build something better. In the dim light of his apartment, Alex made a quiet promise to himself. He couldn't change the past, but he could choose how to live from this point on. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Alex stood alone in his office at La Magnifique, the room dimly lit as the evening sun filtered through the window blinds. The restaurant had long since closed for the day, and the echoes of clinking glasses and laughter from patrons were now just ghosts in the air. Silence surrounded him, and it felt like the walls were closing in, as if they were squeezing out whatever was left of his pride and spirit. He gazed around, his eyes brushing over the fine details he had poured his heart into, the custom moldings, the elegant furnishings, and the photos of the grand opening proudly hanging on the walls. It was all his once, and now it was gone. Today was his last day here. La Magnifique was no longer his sanctuary, no longer a symbol of his accomplishments. Samuel and Lisa had taken it over, and the irony that they had succeeded where he had failed gnawed at him. It was almost poetic, but there was nothing beautiful in this poetry for Alex, only loss. He had built his career, his name, on exclusivity, on creating a space that was as much a fortress as it was a restaurant. And now it was slipping from his fingers, the final thread of control severed by his own arrogance and the changing tides of the community. With a weary sigh, Alex took the brass key, the key that had been with him since the first day, and turned it over in his hands. It was heavier now, weighed down by the significance of what it symbolized. This key had once been his ticket to respect, a symbol of his success, his power. Now it was nothing more than a cold piece of metal, a reminder of everything he had lost. He looked at it, his fingers wrapping tightly around it, almost as if refusing to let go would change anything. The door to his office was slightly ajar, and Alex could see the restaurant floor from where he stood. The tables were still set, perfectly arranged, each glass and plate in its place. It looked pristine, just as it always had, but something about it felt hollow now. La Magnifique was no longer the same place it had been under his reign. Samuel and Lisa had taken his carefully crafted exclusivity and turned it into something open and welcoming. And somehow that had made it thrive in ways Alex had never imagined. He had prided himself on catering to the elite, but in doing so, he had kept out the very essence that made a restaurant, its people. The reality of it all crashed over him, an unrelenting wave of bitterness and regret. He had failed not only as a business owner but as a person. He had let his prejudices and his belief in exclusivity cloud his judgment, blinding him to what truly mattered. Alex knew that his downfall had not been due to the changing market or the financial pressures alone. It was him. He was the architect of his own failure, brick by brick, decision by decision. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but his hands still shook as he turned towards the door. Alex stepped into the hallway, his eyes scanning the restaurant floor for the last time. He could see the reflections of the overhead lights glimmering off the polished surfaces, and for a moment it looked as if everything was the same as it always had been. But deep down, Alex knew nothing would ever be the same again. The life he had built around Le Magnifique, the respect he had commanded, the pride he had taken in his work, it was all gone now. Slowly, Alex made his way towards the entrance of the restaurant. He paused as he reached the front door, looking out at the empty street beyond. It was late, and the once bustling street was now quiet, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. He felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. This was his final exit, and there was no one here to witness it. No friends, no colleagues, no one to say goodbye. It struck him then, the true cost of his pride. He had built walls around himself, not just in the restaurant, but in his life. And now, as those walls crumbled, he found himself standing alone. Alex's eyes were wet, though he did not cry. He would not allow himself that release. Instead, he clenched his jaw and tightened his grip around the key one last time. It was strange how a simple object could carry so much meaning. The key had been his tool of authority, and now it was merely a relic of the past. With a trembling hand, he inserted it into the lock, feeling the click as the bolt turned. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply, savoring this last moment of connection with the place that had once defined him. He let his hand rest on the door for a beat longer before he pulled it open. The cool night air rushed in, and for a moment, Alex felt as though it was pushing him out, forcing him to move, to leave behind everything that he once believed defined his worth. He stepped out, letting the door close behind him. The heavy thud of the door echoed through the empty restaurant, and Alex stood there, staring at the locked door, his hand still resting against it. It was over. As he turned away, Alex took slow, deliberate steps down the cobblestone path, leading away from Le Magnifique. The once vibrant building loomed behind him, its lights still on, a beacon that was no longer meant for him. He couldn't bring himself to look back, to see the life and light that would soon fill the place without him. Instead, he kept his eyes on the ground, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He felt as though he was walking away from more than just a building. He was leaving behind the version of himself that had once been proud, confident, even arrogant. It was as though the weight of his past decisions, his mistakes, and his misplaced pride were pressing down on him, making each step heavier than the last. Alex didn't know what his future held now, and the uncertainty was terrifying. He had defined himself through Le Magnifique, and now, without it, he felt lost, like a ship without an anchor. As he reached the edge of the street, Alex paused and looked back one final time. Le Magnifique stood there, beautiful as ever, glowing warmly in the night. A place that was once his pride and joy now belonged to someone else. He took a deep breath, letting the chill of the night air fill his lungs. He knew he couldn't change what had happened, couldn't turn back time to make different choices. The only thing he could do now was keep moving forward, no matter how painful it felt. Alex turned away from Le Magnifique and walked down the empty street. There were no grand farewells, no applause for the man who had once been at the top. There was only the quiet of the night and the sound of his footsteps fading into the distance. He had lost everything, his restaurant, his respect, his sense of self. But maybe, somewhere beyond the darkness of this night, there was still a chance for him to find something new, to rebuild, not as the man he was, but as someone better. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was his to walk, and for now, that would have to be enough. Under the stewardship of Samuel and Lisa, Le Magnifique became a renewed space, vibrant with life and welcoming to all. Instead of exclusivity and an air of superiority that once alienated patrons, they fostered an atmosphere of inclusion and warmth. The restaurant retained its signature elegance, yet it transformed into a place where everyone, regardless of background, could feel valued and at ease. Bookmark, the space itself had been redesigned with contemporary touches, blending classic charm with modern flair. Samuel and Lisa didn't stop at decor. They expanded the menu to celebrate international flavors and honor diverse cultures. Patrons from all walks of life found a shared connection here, welcomed by the ambiance and kindness that Samuel and Lisa cultivated. Le Magnifique quickly became a symbol of positive change within the community, drawing loyal support from both longtime patrons and newcomers alike. Conversations and laughter filled the dining area, creating an environment that was both inspiring and inclusive. More than a dining establishment, Le Magnifique had become a place of unity where people connected beyond the meal. As the restaurant continued to thrive, the community didn't just embrace the changes, they championed them. Le Magnifique had transformed from an exclusive elite haven into a beacon of acceptance, compassion, and togetherness, truly becoming the heart of the neighborhood. Now, far from the world he once dominated, Alex watched Le Magnifique's success from the sidelines, the memories of his former pride and position growing ever distant. Alone in his modest apartment, he couldn't escape the thoughts that kept returning to haunt him. Decisions that had led him to this point, built upon years of misguided pride and prejudices. Bookmark, go back. In the quiet of his isolation, Alex reflected on his choices. The Le Magnifique he once controlled had flourished under new owners who welcomed all. Samuel and Lisa had taken what he'd created and brought it to new heights, proving that true elegance and success came not from exclusivity, but from embracing diversity and the community. And it was this realization that brought Alex his deepest regret, that he had never understood the essence of what he had been a part of. The bitterness he once held began to fade, replaced by a sense of remorse. He realized that his wealth and status had blinded him to the simple truth. True success lay not in power, but in how one treated others. His insistence on maintaining control and his belief in his superiority had cost him everything, leaving him alone with only memories and regret. In a moment of weakness, Alex considered returning to Le Magnifique, just to glimpse the life he'd left behind. But when he tried to make a reservation, the hostess gently informed him that they were fully booked. The irony hit him. The restaurant he'd once ruled was no longer his, now open to all, including the very people he'd once shut out. As he sat in his quiet apartment, Alex finally understood the weight of his mistakes. The world had moved on without him, embracing values of acceptance and unity that he'd resisted for so long. The version of himself he'd once prided himself on was gone, replaced by a man who saw the price of arrogance and prejudice too late. For Le Magnifique, however, life continued to blossom. Samuel and Lisa had created a space that welcomed everyone, a lasting reminder of the power of empathy, understanding, and community. If this story resonated with you, share it and reflect on what kindness and humility can bring to our lives. Do you believe in second chances, or do you think some lessons must be learned the hard way? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story of transformation, compassion, and the power of community. Through the journey of Le Magnifique, we're reminded that sometimes it takes losing everything to truly understand the value of connection and the strength of inclusivity. If this story resonated with you, comment with a 1 to show your support. If it deeply inspired you, comment with a 2 and share that feeling with us. Feel free to share your own experiences, any life-changing decisions, or meaningful lessons you've learned along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories like this. Stories that may be small, but hold profound lessons for us all. Share your thoughts on Alex's decision and Le Magnifique's transformation in the comments below. Let's build a community where we can all connect and share together.